Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Really interesting research so far. I'm Emma Wiles. I'm in the IS department, and I'm going to talk about AI and hiring. If you have sort of hired anyone recently, that sat on a hiring committee, or even like received referee reports, you might see that people are using Gen AI to do these things. And it's probably good to figure out if that's a good or a bad thing, or has any implications at all. So in general, writing has a really important role in labor markets. It is used for evaluation on both sides of the labor market, outside of labor markets. And writing sort of good informative content is going to be costly for both workers and employers. Writing has frictions. So if you're a worker and you're applying to a job, your resume may not perfectly reflect your underlying abilities. And similarly, if you are an employer writing a job post, your job post might not perfectly reflect exactly the skills you're looking for in a worker that you are trying to hire. And that seems like the sort of thing that LLMs could be really good at. And whether or not they're sort of good at it, if one or both sides of the market is using this technology on their writing materials, that is going to change match formation. What if someone is hired, who is hired, and sort of for better or for worse. There's also, man, all my main takeaways are on the first slide, the top of the slide. But sort of language, like word processors have been used for sort of forever, and those have long had spell checkers in them. So sort of language models have always sort of been a part of writing. But there are very different types of writing sort of assistance softwares. So there's things like Grammarly, which tweak and just sort of improve, thank you, what you've already written. And then there's stuff like ChatGPT, which will generate text entirely from scratch. And so the effects that this might have on the matching process is not necessarily the same. Sorry, guys. Quite sure what I'm doing. There we go. Okay, and people are definitely using them. So there's already sort of a lot of anecdotal evidence that people are writing cover letters, resumes, and job posts using various forms of generative AI. Okay, so this first paper I'm going to talk about is on a type of technology like Grammarly, if you've used it. So it's a type of technology that is going to tweak and improve what you've already written, but it will not generate any writing from scratch. And so, okay, we're talking about sort of the role of writing in match formation, and we can show in observational data on an online labor market that workers who have more errors in their writing are less likely to get hired. So this is just a plot of workers' errors in their resumes, and if your resume is riddled with errors, you are not as likely to get hired as if you have not very many errors in your resume. However, that's not obviously an issue. That could, or not an issue. It could just be that people who are sort of better writers are better workers, and that's why they're getting hired. Or it's possible that employers have an actual specific interest in hiring good writers, whether or not they're good workers. So the two things we're going to look for in this paper, which is joint with John Horton and Zenale Uniqua, is first we're going to ask, can algorithmically enhanced writing that is non-generative improve hiring outcomes for job seekers put on their resumes? And if so, how useful is writing quality as a signal of the worker's underlying ability? So the way we're going to do this is we have an experiment run on a large online labor market where we randomly assign new workers to a treatment or a control group. And in the treatment group, they are given access to this AI tool, which tweaks and improves their resume, but it does not write it from scratch. So we're going to use the text of the resume and then all of their behavior on the platform to understand their outcomes. So let's say that we find that those who are given this, algorithmic writing assistance, maybe they do better. Why would employers prefer hiring workers with better writing, even if the underlying worker quality is no different? So it's possible, for example, that writing is a signal of diligence or attention to detail or being a hard worker or something like that. And we'll call that the signaling view. But it's also possible that writing ability does not actually signal that you are a hard worker. It's just that if you had a resume riddled with typos, that the employer couldn't tell what you were trying to say. And so they didn't know if you were a good fit or not. And so this we'll call the clarity view, is that good writing helps to employers to understand what the job seeker is proposing and what their skills are, and allows them to be in the consideration set or not. And so we're testing these hypotheses with this large experiment on this online labor market, where we're going to randomize writing quality by giving access, these treated workers access to this Grammarly type technology. So the online labor market is going to look something like an offline labor market. The sort of hiring process starts when an employer posts a job. Workers are going to apply to jobs. They're applying with a cover letter and a wage bid. Employers can see all these applications. They can see the workers' history on the platform, and they can interview. They can invite workers to hire that they're interested in. And then if they choose to make a hire, which is about 40% of the time, then a contract is formed and all of the work is completed online. So this isn't this isn't like Uber. This is something where all of the labor that you're hiring on this platform is work that can be done over the internet. And then at the end of the contract, should it happen, the employer and the worker both rate each other. Okay, so the actual technology itself that we're giving them is going to be something like a jazzed up spell checker. So it's not just a spell checker. It does correct both spelling and grammar, but it takes the text that you've written, and then it's going to underline things that it sees are issues. And issues can be both errors, or they can be more nuanced measures of writing quality. So for example, it will give suggestions that you can choose to accept or not accept, but it requires active effort on the person using its part to accept a suggestion or not. And the suggestions are for things like the delivery or the clarity of the text. And then it's going to make the sort of writing sort of better. Okay, so what we find is that the treated workers have much better written resumes. So their resumes have many fewer errors, for one. And then we also find that the treated workers are 8% more likely to be hired in their first month on the platform. So the treated workers are more likely to be hired, which means that employers do have this preference for good writing in resumes. And not only are they more likely to be hired, but the treated workers who are hired make 10% higher hourly wages conditioned on being hired. And what that means is that the workers who are being hired, the employers are selecting more productive workers in the treatment group. So they're hiring these higher wage workers in the treatment group. And despite the fact that the employers are paying 10% higher wages, they are no less satisfied with the quality of the work done by the workers that they hire. And the way we're going to talk about that, we're going to show that, is going to be by using the amount of hours they demand from the worker, whether or not they ever rehire the worker, and then the star ratings at the end of the contract, the worker, as well as the sentiment of the reviews. So these employers will leave reviews for the workers at the end of their contract, and we use sentiment analysis to see that they're no more negative in the treatment group. And so what we were kind of learning from these results is that not only do employers have this preference for better writers, but we provide evidence that for the clarity view, that the treatment is allowing good workers to show they are good, as opposed to making it easier for bad workers to imitate good workers. So that's the fear, right? Is if you're giving this tool to everybody, that what we kind of talk about with large language models a lot is people are worried that it's going to have these people who are really bad workers now be able to spruce up their resumes and their cover letters so that they look amazing, they'll get hired, and then they will harm employers because they will trick employers into hiring worse people. And we find absolutely no evidence of that. They're hiring just as good people, if not sort of more productive people. And so this suggests that sort of using writing quality, at least in terms of like errors, is not a good measure of workers' underlying quality. Okay, so great. Algorithmic writing assistance has no downside. This must also be true for generative AI. Great, everyone can use Gen AI in their cover letters. There will be no problems with that, right? Not necessarily. So this is 2 minutes. All right. So in the second paper that I'm going to talk about in 2 minutes, we give employers in the same marketplace generative AI written first drafts. So once again, this is not a Grammarly type tool. This is ChatGPT. And this is another paper with John Horton. And in this experiment, new employers who are signing up for the platform are given this AI written first draft. They're asked, like, give me a sentence about what you're looking for in a hire. They give a sentence. ChatGPT gives them a beautifully written job post, and then they can post that. And the first thing we find is that employers are really interested in this. So 75% of them opt in to receiving the AI written first draft. And because there's a lot of drop off in the job posting process, you're lowering the cost of posting the job, you're lowering the cost of hiring. And so treated employers are 20% more likely to post a job. So they're much more likely to post a job. So that's great. There's like 5,000 additional job posts in the treatment group as opposed to the control group. Fantastic. However, treated employers are 15% less likely to hire someone. So this means despite the 5,000 additional job posts, there are 0 additional hires. Okay, so that could be because, just the marginal jobs are all so bad that all 5,000 new jobs that are posted don't make a hire. But we find that both the treatment is inducing these kind of lower value jobs where the employer is not that interested in hiring. It's maybe like a ghost job, if you've heard that. But it's also going to lower the probability of hiring for the inframarginal jobs as well, because we show that it crowds out effort that the employer would have spent making the job post specific. So treated employers are spending 40% less time writing their job posts. The text of the job post in the treatment group is much more generic than in the control group. So as a sense of magnitude, if you take like the most generic and the least generic job post, believe me that we've done this in a sensible way, but we're using the text embeddings to measure the generic and specificness of the text of the job posts. In the treatment group, there is a 10% increase in the sort of average generic score of the job posts. And so if we just want to zoom out a little bit and think about welfare implications of this, on the one hand, we've got a bunch more job posts, and maybe that's great, but none of them make a hire. So it's not useful for workers because none of these are going to hire anyone. It's not useful for the platform because they're not making any money out of it. Employers save some time. That's the big plus side, is that it saves employers time. So that's nice, but the overall cost to job seekers is 5 times larger than the savings to employers. So this was a welfare reducing intervention, and very, very, very quickly, why it matters is writing is used on sort of both sides of the labor market, but also in almost every aspect of life we're evaluated using writing. And as AI generated application materials sort of become more and more common, this is almost certainly going to change the matching process, both the supply of things like job posts and tweets and any other type of online content. But it's also going to make sort of writing a less reliable signal of ability. And so my big takeaway from these 2 papers is that if you have access to a tool like Grammarly, which tweaks but does not write content on your behalf, you get the positive hiring effects with no negative downstream effects, no externalities on the other side of the market. But when the participants are given ChatGPT, that is going to make the writing more generic, and it is increasing congestion by inducing job posts from people who have really no interest in hiring. And so it just suggests that if you are a platform or you're someone that is interested in this, you want to be very careful with thinking about how you're using these kinds of AI tools on your platform. Thank you very much.
Another amazing presentation, and isn't it fun presenting years worth of work in 12 minutes?
Yeah, I haven't done 2 in 12. It's a lot.
2 and 12. It's the bite-sized version. Great. I think we have
question. Very interesting and impressive. You went through 2 papers in such a short time span. So like LLMs can help with writing, but I think it can also help with information processing. So I imagine employers may use look at resume or job market papers and summarize them and podcast something. So I was wondering if you can say anything about the effect on information processing rather than writing side.
Yeah. So none of these experiments change anything about the way information is processed, but it's absolutely true that when, let's see if it's there. Like, not only is this the case where you can have sort of AI happening right on the job post and on the resumes, it's also very, very likely that you have some sort of AI tool that is going to be then processing all of your applications, at least. Maybe it's also processing all the job posts. If you see on these kind of job boards, there's now a lot of automatic applications that you can tell. You post a job, 1 second later, you get like 15 applications, and that's a person who set up a bot in order to get them to apply to basically as many jobs as possible, assuming it has some keyword. So I can't really say anything about that from these experiments, but it's certainly doing that. And it's now in this weird situation where we have like AI generated content on both sides of the market also being processed by some sort of AI tool. So it's really, yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of implications for labor markets, but I can't say too much about that part of it.
Roshan here. How do you think AI detection will factor into it on both sides?
Well, it's hard to say because I think in the case of a technology like Grammarly, you wouldn't want to use AI detection because what we show is that it's not making any bad people look great. So there's no sort of negative implications on the other side of the market from you using this technology. When you think about ChatGPT, and okay, this entire thing is generated from scratch, that actually really does seem like it can remove this, sort of signal of underlying something. Whether or not it's ability, I'm not sure. Are people going to start using that software? I don't know. I mean, we don't find that in this second experiment, we don't find that they're hiring like horrible people or they're like the job quality overall is worse. But it's definitely, yeah, I don't know if you would want to use. I think it depends on the technology and the situation, whether you would actually want to use detection software. It's also not very good, as far as I can tell. So.
Last question for Shula.
Fascinating study. On the second experiment, do you think if you added a human in the loop to the LLM, where the employers could get some coaching on how to improve the LLM output, you could get to better outcomes? So
if you got the right now it's possible that the experiment had this negative effect on the sort of infomercial jobs, the jobs that were always going to be posted no matter what. It's possible that if you improve the technology enough, like let's say you got an AI that actually could perfectly understand what it is you're trying to say and then get it down, that would still have these negative effects. Most of the negative hiring effect that we find is driven by this huge increase in job posts from employers who do not care about hiring anyone. So even if they got rid of the fact that they're kind of really generic, I bet that this would help the genericness. So I think that would help with making sort of less generic content on the platform, which is good in and of itself. But I don't think it's going to solve the problem because it's still going to make it basically too costless to post a job. And I think my big takeaway is that costs are really important and you want some cost to posting something.